Good morning, children. Let us start with part 4 of our chapter Kings and Chronicles. In the previous parts, we discussed about the Mughal Empire, which is conventionally said to have been founded in 1526 by Babur, a warrior chieftain from what today is Uzbekistan. He employed aid from neighboring Safavid empires and Ottoman empires to defeat the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, in the First Battle of Panipat. The Mughals began to rule parts of India from 1526 and by 1700 ruled most of the subcontinent. This is what we have studied till now. Now let us proceed with our part 4. The ideal kingdom, a divine light, a unifying force, and just sovereignty as social contract. These will be the three things that we'll be studying in this particular part related to an ideal kingdom. The ideal kingdom, a divine light. Court chroniclers drew upon many sources to show that the power of the Mughal kings came directly from God. One of the legends they narrated was that of the Mongol queen Alenkua, who was impregnated by a ray of sunshine while resting in her tent. The offspring she bore carried this divine light and passed it from generation to generation. Abul Fazl placed Mughal kingship as the highest station in the hierarchy of objects receiving light emanating from God, that was called as Far-e-Izadi. Here he was inspired by a famous Iranian Sufi Shihabuddin Suhrawardi Levin 91, who first developed this idea. According to this idea, there was a hierarchy in which the divine light was transmitted to the king, who then became the source of spiritual guidance for his subjects. Children, in divine light, Abul Fazl has placed Mughal kingship as the highest station in the hierarchy of objects, receiving light emanating from God, Farizadi. And who inspired him? It was Iranian Sufi Shihabuddin Sohrawardi. As he developed the idea of hierarchy in which the divine light was transmitted to the king. Now, that is the concept of divine light. A unifying force, Sulh-e-Kul. Mughal chronicles present the empire as comprising many different ethnic communities and religious communities, like the Hindus, the Jainas, Zoroastrians, and Muslims. As the source of all peace and stability, the emperor stood above all religious and ethnic groups, mediated among them, and ensured that justice and peace prevailed among them and in the empire. Abul Fazl describes the idea of Sulh-e-Kul, that is absolute peace, as the cornerstone of enlightened rule. In Sulh-e-Kul, all religions and schools of thought had freedom of expression, but on condition that they did not undermine the authority of the state or fight among themselves. The idea of Sulh-e-Kul was implemented through state policies. The nobility under the Mughals was a composite one comprising Iranis, Turanis, Afghanis, Rajputs, and Deccanis, all of whom were given positions and awards purely on the basis of their service and their loyalty to the king. Further, Akbar abolished the tax on pilgrimage in 1563 and jizya in 1564, as the two were based on religious discrimination. Instructions were sent to officers of the empire to follow the precept of Sulh-e-Kul in administration. Children, Sulh-e-Kul is an Arabic term that literally means peace with all, universal peace or absolute peace. It is drawn from a Sufi mystic principle. It was applied by the third Mughal emperor of India, Akbar, who reigned from 1556 to 1605. and he has described it as a peaceful and harmonious relationship among different religions. It became method of judging, his method of judging. That is Akbar's method of judging what was legally right or wrong within his empire, and was created because Akbar understood that he was trying to build political institutions. The main features of Sulh Kul are no discrimination on the basis of religion and no discrimination on the basis of race. Focus on universal peace was there in it. Secular form of government was there in it, and religious tolerance was given importance in this. The implication of Akbar's policy of Sulh Kul was that Akbar established separation of state and religion and opened government positions to members of all religions. He abolished the jizya on non-Muslims, and the forced conversion of prisoners of war to Islam was also stopped. So that is why it is called as a unifying force or Sulh Kul. Just sovereignty as a social contract. Abul Fazl defines sovereignty as a social contract, as the emperor protects the four essences of his subjects, namely Jan, Mal, Namus, and Din or Din, and in return demands obedience and a share of resources from them. That is, it will not be one sided, it will be both sided. Four essences of you I will protect, and in return, what you will be doing is you will be providing your obedience and a share of resources. Now, let me just elaborate these. That is, it is given clearly here. Jan means life, Mal means property, Namus means honor, and Deen means faith. Only just sovereigns were thought to be able to honor the contract with power and divine guidance. Who were the sovereigns? Sovereigns were the rulers. Capital cities. The heart of the Mughal Empire was its capital city where the court assembled. The capital cities of the Mughals frequently shifted during the 16th and the 17th centuries. Babur took over the Lodi capital of Agra, though during the 4 years of his reign the court was frequently on the move. During the 1560s, Akbar had the fort of Agra constructed with red sandstone, quarried from the adjoining regions. In the 1570s, he decided to build a new capital at Fatehpur Sikri, or as Fatehpur Sikri. One of the reasons prompting this may have been that Sikri was located on the direct road to Ajmer, where the Dargah of Sheikh Muinuddin Chishti had become an important pilgrimage center. Akbar commissioned the construction of a white marble tomb for Sheikh Salim Chishti next to the majestic Friday Mosque at Sikri. The enormous arched gateway, Buland Darwaja, was meant to remind visitors of the Mughal victory in Gujarat. In 1585, the capital was transferred to Lahore to bring the northwest under greater control, and Akbar closely watched the frontier for 13 years. Shah Jahan pursued sound fiscal policies and accumulated enough money to indulge his passion for building. In 1648, the court, army, and household moved from Agra to the newly completed imperial capital, that was Shah Jahanabad. It was a new addition to the old residential city of Delhi with the Red Fort, the Jama Masjid, a tree-lined esplanade with bazaars, that was Chandni Chowk, and spacious homes for the nobility. Shah Jahan's new city was appropriate to a more formal vision of a grand monarchy.